we are live.
Oh, we are?
Yeah. It says it in the corner of my screen.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. All right, we just got another minute. I'm going to go share that then.
Awesome.
Yeah. Woo. So we want to remember that. Going live on Firefox.
I guess it's not a fan of Chrome.
Yeah. Okay, here we go.
Which is surprising because it seems like you can do a lot of things on Chrome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I'm just getting it shared. So close. All these little moving parts.
Yep. Tedious.
Okay. Shared, tagged, and it is 1 p.m.
All
1
right.
p.m. Woo, we did it.
Light it up
Welcome
Wednesday.
Yes, Light It Up Wednesdays. So today I'm so excited to have somebody who's so dear to me to chat with and converse. And so I want to introduce to you Jarren Kitchens. He is a co-owner and founding member of 0 Point Athletics in Calamasa, California. And he has a passion for holistic health and wellness that has led him to his mission of being service to others by helping them to realize that their choices can lead to freedom, personal power, and pure potential. He believes that true health comes through the unification of mind, body, and spirit.
Absolutely.
And his interests include, but are not limited to, human movement, exercise physiology, psychology, spirituality, nutrition, and biohacking. His favorite hobby right now is mountain biking, and his favorite read right now, and I add the right now because, you know, we change, right? We change our mind. But right now you love mountain biking and reading The Eye of the I by Dr. David Hawkins.
Yep.
So welcome, Jarren.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited. We're going to be talking about the role of the shadow archetype in the healing journey and how working with this shadow can lead to a greater understanding of the things we unintentionally do that keep us stuck. And it helps us to discover the light that opens the door into healing.
Sounds great. I love this topic.
Shadow. And when I first heard about the shadow, it was kind of scary. Like I said, dark, evil part of us. Right?
Yep.
So how would you describe the shadow? Like the basic shadow that we work through?
Yeah. So the way I view the shadow is any unconscious behavior pattern that you are not fully in recognition of in your life. Carl Jung describes it as being the dark version of yourself. And I would describe it that way for the most part as well. So it's this very unconscious behavior pattern that you're not fully recognizing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in unity, I think we would just describe that as the part of us that chooses from fear, lack, and limitation.
Yeah, I would agree with that too.
Yeah, it feels like the shadow wants to keep us in a comfort zone.
Yeah, and I would assume because a lot of that is because that's what we're familiar with. So we develop our personalities throughout our life as a child, and we have these different forms of trauma and these different forms of experiences that kind of impact our personality. So that's what I really admire about the shadow, though, because through the navigation and understanding of it is how we can develop a more authentic relationship with ourselves. So it's kind of this is like bringing the shadow into light, literally, is taking that part of yourself and recognizing it as a gift to your personal freedom and growth.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay. So the shadow is both, it can be a hindrance, but it can also be a helper.
correct. Yeah, so it's like, if you want to change something in your life and you become aware of this pattern that is consistently holding you back and you're not really fully understanding it, I kind of believe as spiritual beings, we all come to this experience with a certain task. And those past traumas, you can kind of reconceptualize it to where it's this gift for you to learn whatever it is that you need to learn here. So I think, at least for me personally, like speaking, it's one of my responsibilities, not only to myself, but to my community and life here on earth, to navigate and go deep into those so I can grow here on this plane as a spiritual being in service to others.
Okay. Now I know that there is a shadow there can be a shadow involved in somebody's journey to personal healing. That it may be the shadow, they stay in the shadow so they don't get to experience healing. But if they dive into the shadow, that's when they start experiencing healing. And not just emotional healing, also physical healing.
Right. I believe that as well.
Yeah.
And it kind of boils back down to this. So I read a book a few years ago, and I'm trying to remember the name of it. And while it's coming to me, I'll explain like the whole premise of the book. So the whole premise of the book is talking about how trauma is stored in the body. And when you have trauma that stores up in the body, it starts to actuate itself as illness. So if you look at terms of like fascia, which fascia is like this, you can think of this very like spidery web that encapsulates your muscles. And that's actually what helps you to move. It's like this, almost like this system of rubber bands that propels you through space-time. And so when you have a very traumatic experience, and I'll just use the analogy that I always use, for example, is if you're driving on the freeway and there's a lot of traffic, what are your shoulders doing? Well, they're probably up here, right? Or if you're really depressed and you have a lot of sadness, then you take a posture of being like this. So emotions really do resonate throughout the human body. And when you have that constant pattern that you're putting yourself into, well, then that one turns into the place of least resistance. So your body starts to move that way. But because it's not what our truth is, we start to develop like all this illness. So if I'm driving in traffic and I'm like this all the time, I might have chronic neck pain for years and not even recognize it. And that is my understanding of how trauma can actuate into like actual physical illness or via the shadow. And I think the shadow works the same way. So like if I had a really traumatic experience from my father or something, to where I felt the need to always close down because that is what protected me, then I might develop some kind of inhibition or illness later in my life. And that's how I think the shadow actually actuates through the physical form.
Yeah. I know myself growing up, I didn't realize this, but I would go into victim consciousness if somebody didn't like something about me. And I never understood this until I started studying like archetypes in the shadow. And one day somebody said something to me about how they didn't approve of something I did. And I saw that shadow of me wanting to shrink into the shame, feeling victimized. And I realized in that moment, it's like, whoa, I could just say something. And like I spoke my words out loud to this person, and they were just kind of like, oh, well, okay.
Yeah.
And it was so weird. Like I had to really see that in my imagination, I was in that like dark space. But I'd been there, I don't know how many times before, and I had no idea.
Right. And that's hard to do.
Yeah.
It can be very hard to speak your truth. I know I've had a very interesting struggle with just stating what my wants are throughout my life. So it can be really scary.
Yeah.
And I think it's through like that realization. It's like you can have this idea like, oh yeah, I'm excuse me, I've always had a really hard time speaking my truth. And it's like you can go knowing that, but I think the real work starts to happen when you kind of start to dig into it and you start to realize where that starts to stem from. And then really making the conscious choice, well, do I want to live in fear or do I want to live in truth? And that's when healing, that's kind of like the 0 point for healing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I remember years ago, I had a really minor back injury. Like it was pretty minor. I mean, this was probably 15 years ago. But this back injury got me out of doing something that I didn't want to do. And what I realized is that as long as my back hurt, well, I could pick and choose where I wanted to show up in my life.
Right.
And that happened then to me 2 years ago. I got a pretty significant back injury though. But I remember thinking about that. It's like, I was like, no, I don't want an excuse to not show up in my life. What I want is to speak my truth and say, no, thank you. I don't want to do this. But I couldn't do that while I was in the shadow. So it's almost like it's kind of protective of us.
Absolutely. I think I I think the shadow really tries to show up as a way to like what you were saying, to protect us. It's a form of self-preservation. And that's also where some healing can happen too, because there's this very interesting negative connotation with the shadow. And when you can start to really address that and understand the reality of what it was trying to do, you can then thank it and just be like, thank you so much. I love that you did this and that this was here to protect me, but it no longer serves me. And I'm going to start living in truth.
Yeah.
And it's just about creating love and compassion instead of being in the victim fear mentality. It's creating just that little mental shift to where you can have gratitude.
Yeah. Do you mind if I share what you sent me today as a text? Because I just thought what you wrote was so beautiful about the shadow. Okay.
Absolutely.
You said there are a lot of people that get confused about the shadow, but the shadow is that okay, wait, I'm reading this wrong. I think where a lot of people get confused about the shadow is that in order for us to grow, we must recognize the shadow and give it thanks. Because at one point or another, it was our response to self-preservation, and that the shadow is a gift to assist, is the ascension of becoming more the accession. Man, I can't read right now.
So in the ascension.
Yeah, the accession of becoming more authentic. More authentic.
Right.
It helps us to become more authentic with ourselves. And the only way we can be more authentic with the universe and with our relationships and in our own life, to be more authentic right there.
Yep.
Yeah.
God is within.
Yeah. That reminds me of that verse from the Gospel of Thomas, that if you call forth that is within you, that is within you will save you. But if you don't bring that forth, what is within you will destroy you.
Yeah.
Do you think is that referring to the shadow?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And it goes both ways too. It's it can either be in relation to your shadow or it can be in relation to your light, because whatever the internal process that's going on within you is the way you're going to perceive the rest of the world to be. And which I think is so beautiful, because it's more, I don't know if validation would be the word, but it brings me closer to the realization and the remembrance that we're all one and that everything is in a unified field.
So we can project our own shadow onto the world around us And then that will give us a hint of what we need to work on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And this is, and I told you I'd probably bring this up in our talk, but why I love the type of, they call it like men's work, but the way I look at it is it's all about like shadow work. And it's really just about having a community of people who have gone through their own experience of navigating their shadow, and holding the space and creating the containers so that you can do it as well. And this is actually when I started to really get introduced to like the works of Carl Jung. Robert Bly was, I think it was back in 17. I did my initiation to this organization called the Mankind Project. And this is when this whole idea of the shadow started to like come to me. And I was like, wow, this is really powerful. Like there's this whole side of me that I didn't even know like existed. I just thought it was my fate to be in victim mode all the time and that the world was always against me. But yeah, it was, I think having a really great support group to show you, you know, what the shadow is a big deal. And I think especially for, you know, a lot of men, I could say here in Western civilization is that we don't have an initiation process. And at least from my perspective, there's not so much of a family or community unit anymore, unless you go to like a church or you can consider a fitness facility as like a community, but there's no tribes anymore. So there's not this process of like going withinward that's ritualistic, which I think a lot of people need.
Oh, and so I bet not having these rituals then affect how we're able to recognize our own shadow. Because we really do need guidance to go working through that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, in our civilization, I don't think a whole lot of people know what the shadow is. Like, you know, all the people that we know and that we converse with, they're all very familiar with it. But I think to a huge portion of the world, they're not very aware of like Jungian psychology or shadow work or anything like that. So I think there's just a lot of confusion out there right now. And I think that doing your own work and doing it for yourself is also in service to others, because as soon as you can start doing the inner work with yourself, that's an experience that you get to share with the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And inspire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you like to work with your dreams too?
I like to pull my dreams apart. So I think that our brains work based off of symbology.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I view dreams is if there's an event happening in my dream, I don't take it as like the literal expression of like the scene that's being played out. And I break it down into symbols. So if like my dad was in my dream, I'd be like, oh, it was interesting that he was in my dream doing this thing. And I'm not really sure why he's doing that because that's out of his character. But what does my dad symbolize to me? And maybe what does the thing that he's doing symbolize to me? And that's when you can really like crack into your own psychology. So I think that's really fun to do.
It is fun, huh?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Nice. Okay, so I want to read you a Robert Bly quote, and I would love to have your input on it.
Yeah.
Every part of our personality that we do not love will become hostile to us.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, it's really breaking down the definition of what hostile could be. So I think the first thing that comes to mind when I hear the word hostile is like an attacking. So if you're not loving this part of yourself, and there's this maybe it's an avoidance or it's shame, it can resonate as shame or whatever it could be. Well, then that kind of comes back to the picture of trauma is stored in the body, and we can use the physical form of this is like you'll eventually start to develop some illness.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry, did I cut out? Oh, there.
Just for a second.
Yep,
We still heard you though.
Yeah. So I love that quote a lot, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And it comes back to whatever that you're avoiding and putting off within your own self is going to actuate into some kind of whether it's physical illness or just some kind of limitation that you're experiencing in your life, and could be a habitual pattern.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I had somebody point out to me a few years ago that my inner rebel was really acting up. And so I was supposed to meditate and work with her. And what was funny is when I went into meditation with her, I mean, she looked like me. She was me, but maybe 16 or 17 years old. And she was angry and just pissed. I mean, she was really out of control. And this
She
person
looked like a punk rocker.
Yeah, she was like a punk rocker. But somebody was telling me, it's like, you need to thank her. You know, she's just trying to look after you. And I started thinking, like, how many of us, especially those of us who are not taught to be assertive, we don't speak our truth because we're afraid. And if we have an inner rebel that is all fired up to help us, like, man, we should be like, yeah, thank you, inner rebel.
Yeah, because it showed you a limitation that you could have been lacking in. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Like whatever is strong in her is strong in me too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it brought you some strength.
Yeah.
It's funny because I definitely had a rebellious archetype when I was growing up too.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm really glad that you brought it up, because I don't think I've even thought about that archetype in quite a while. But I know that in that process of rebelling and being kind of like in this mindset of, yeah, we don't need the government, like money's a lie, you know, that whole kind of like shebang, really led me to start really thinking for myself and not to always conform to what others perceive to be the right idea. So for me, it was kind of like that realization of, oh, I can make my own decisions and I can lead my own path.
Yeah.
But it also didn't serve me in a lot of ways either. So
Right.
I had to thank the rebel and let him go on his way.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll call him later if I need some advice.
Yeah. I can see where my rebel had me do things just to piss somebody off, and it didn't really serve me.
Yeah.
It's just how she thought, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
So
it's really oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think it also gets really interesting of when you start to think about, at least it's fun for me to think about what was the turning point that had happened in my life to invite that rebel in.
Yeah.
And that just makes me feel like there's more of a self-awareness and a knowing of where I've been and where I've gone kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool.
Yeah.
So, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I keep jumping on there.
Oh, no, I'm done. That was
okay.
it.
I've been thinking about the shadow, like just looking forward to today. And I was wondering, I would say, like, since this pandemic started, that I have a little shadow that I've never noticed before, called maybe the horribilizer. Like, oh, all this is going to go wrong, and this is even going to get worse, and this is going to be, So do you feel like we can develop like a new shadow, like just for a new situation?
So you're referring to like whatever circumstance starts to happen in your life that a new shadow evolves kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so. Because in my previous belief, I would have thought that most of my life trauma came from when I was a young child.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until I started to get older that I still had a lot of really traumatic things still happen in my life. And some of those issues I'm still navigating and dealing with. And, you know, there's one situation where it's been a few years now since it happened, and there's still this shadow from that is playing out in my life that I'm working with too.
Mhm.
And I think as far as like this whole pandemic thing is gone, for me, I feel like it is brought up past shadow. And it's kind of like this thing, and what I've been telling everyone is like, this pandemic could be a really big blessing for a lot of people, because with all this time that we're spending indoors and not working and putting our energy elsewhere, gives us all this time to really go deep into who we are.
Mhm.
And when you're by yourself and you're not engaged with everything that's going on, a lot of things are going to start showing up that you weren't even fully aware of. So for me, it's like there was all these things that I've been working on for such a long time, and now everything's kind of slowed down, and those things are starting to kind of come back. But now that I've worked with it, I have the experience and the knowing that it's not my truth. And it's interesting because these things will show up and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a lie. Like, I'm just like, I know I can go this way. I'm just going to keep going this way.
Yeah. Next.
Yeah, next. But it makes me wonder too, is, you know, I don't know if I don't think you ever get rid of your shadow. I don't think that's just something that just disappears no matter how hard you work on it. But it's
Mhm.
more of embodying the lessons that it's showing you and deciding when it's not serving you in that moment.
Oh, so we can move them from our shadow to our internal board of directors.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Rebel, I'm going to give you a seat at the table. Let's
Right.
talk.
You have some value there.
Yeah. Now, if somebody
really
is
cool
really
it serves as a
what?
reminder. I was just
Yeah.
going to say it serves as a reminder.
Yeah. Now, if somebody were to come to you, and you probably have people talking about this to you right now, if they're really struggling now because of the pandemic and a lifestyle change and spending more time with themselves, I mean, what's something that you might say to them to like maybe either comfort them or to help them get started on discovering like what the shadow has to say?
Mm-hmm. Um, well, as often as it seems to be recommended, I don't think it's over recommended, but getting into a mindfulness practice. Um, so I did something called a 10-day Vipassana sitting back when I was 18. And what Vipassana is it creates this opportunity for you to be in isolation with yourself, but meditating for like 16 hours a day. It's really intense. But through this long meditation cycle, you'll start to have these sensations and the noticing of the experience of what they call sankharas, is what I call shadows. And so sankharas are like these, whether it's an emotional sensation or a physical sensation of where it's providing you, it can provide you comfort or it can provide you discomfort. But the practice is being able to breathe through it and not develop an attachment to it. And that's where the idea of equanimity comes in. So I think really getting into a mindfulness practice, a meditation practice, especially with all the time that's on everyone's hands at the moment, I think can be a really big tool, because you can actually start to, I feel like the unconscious mind can be kind of hard to pull apart at times, but physical sensation is an immediate response. You know when something's like going on, right? And so that can give you the tool and to start to develop that equanimity. So if I have like a lot of back pain while I'm meditating, well, am I going to make the decision to stay on that back pain and then possibly make it even more painful because I have so much focus on it? Or am I just going to allow and accept that that is the reality of my back situation and then see where that takes
Okay.
an attachment?
Okay. Well, that
Other
sounds
than that, yeah, other than that, getting into a creative process. I know Carl Jung used to have people draw mandalas, and he talks about drawing mandalas as like the exact like printout of your mind, at least if I have that correctly. So getting into a creative process and seeing where stuff is starting to develop in front of your eyes. When you start to pull that apart, that can be also a really great tool to navigate.
Oh, that would be a fun project to delve into at this time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very creative. Well, Jarren, it is now 1:30, and I know you have a super busy day ahead of you. But I just want to say how fun it was to like talk with you about this. That was so interesting.
Yeah, I had a blast.
Yeah. So if you have any more questions about the shadow, or if you just want to find out more about what Jarren does, you can find him on Facebook. You could go to 0 Point Athletics Facebook page, or they're on Instagram, or you can look for Jarren Kitchens. He's out there.
I am.
Yeah.
For now.
Yes. Yes, you are.
All right, Deanna. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much, Jarren. You have a wonderful rest of your day. I love you.
I love you too.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
All right, bye, everybody. Thank you for being here.